Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Caitlin DeVries, and I work here at EGLE, and I will be moderating tonight's session, as well as serving as the hearing officer for our hearing portion of tonight. Before we go ahead and get into the info session and hearing, let's cover some quick housekeeping items. So first off, I do want to let everybody know that your lines are muted throughout the meeting tonight. But we are recording the meeting. So if you need to leave early or know of somebody who may be interested in this hearing and what we're talking about tonight, the recording will be shared out in a couple of days, either tomorrow, hopefully by Thursday at the latest. And everyone will get emailed. That will get emailed out to everyone who's participated tonight, as well as the meeting getting posted to our YouTube channel. So how do you ask a question tonight? I will remind you of these options again once we get to that question and answer portion, but I do want to cover them here first. So it's pretty easy to ask a question by typing it into the question and answer box in the bottom of your screen in your Zoom toolbar. You can type that question at any time throughout tonight's session while the presenter is talking, or whatever is easiest for you so you don't lose your train of thought during the presentation. If your question gets answered along the way, that's okay. We'll be happy to reiterate it to make sure that you got the answer, you got that question answered. Another way to ask a question is to click on that raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen as well when we get to that question and answer portion. That will raise your hand so you can ask your question verbally. And lastly, if there's any folks on the phone right now, you'll be able to type *9 into your phone, and that will raise your hand on our end, and we can unmute you and you can ask that question verbally as well. So how will things work tonight? I do briefly want to just cover how things will work. We do have two distinct portions of the evening. The first portion is where we have several of our air quality division staff here talking about the proposed project from Fibrosan, what the proposed air permit looks like, and how the review is done. After that, we will get into the question and answer portion of the evening, where we'll have a little bit more dialogue back and forth on things. If there's anything that didn't make sense during the presentation, or on anything, other questions you may have about the materials, if you've read any of those that were sent out. During that time is when we'll get those questions answered. Once we get done with the question and answer portion, with folks either being done with their questions or at 7 o'clock, whichever comes first, is when we'll end that question and answer portion of the evening. We do try to get to as many questions as we can, but we don't always get to them during the time frame of the evening. So if there are any questions that are left over, we will do our best to get back to you after the meeting if there are any. So after the question and answer portion of the evening, we will get into the second portion, which is the public hearing portion. This is the time for you to, oops, I don't know why that clicked forward. Sorry about that. The public portion here, public hearing portion of the evening, that's really hard for me to say this evening, so sorry about that, which is the time for you to make a statement on the official record about the proposed project and the proposed draft permit. We will not be interacting at that time or answering any of the questions that you may have, but I do want to remind you that we do have that interactive portion in the beginning during the question and answer part of tonight's presentation. So if we don't give you any feedback, that is why. So as I jumped ahead a little bit before, get back to these group norms. So we've started using some group norms for our public meetings, especially in our informational sessions where we have some dialogue. These group norms were developed with a group of advocates in the Flint community and really do help set the stage for how we want to interact with all of you, and then how we hope all of you interact with us. They're pretty simple to follow. First is to listen actively with an ear to understanding, which is probably why you're here tonight, is to listen. Next, we want to make sure that you are asking questions and getting clarification that you need. followed by criticizing ideas and not individuals. We want to make sure that we're communicating respectfully, and finally, to take space and make space. So what does that one mean? So that means we want to give everyone an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment that has a question or comment. So we want to make sure that we've got ample time and make space for that. Okay, so I've taken care of a bunch of our housekeeping items. So now I want to get into our agenda. Before I get into the meat of the agenda, I do want to take a second and introduce Annette Switzer, our Air Quality Division Director. I know Annette wants to come on and officially welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. So Annette, whenever you are ready, you can go ahead and take the mic.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. I'm Annette Switzer. I'm the Director of the Air Quality Division and the decision maker for this permit action. We're glad that you could join us online. Hearing from community members like you is an essential part of our permitting process, and your input truly helps us improve our work. There's been a lot of interest in this facility and their permit application, so we're glad to have such great community representation. There are a couple things I want to cover before I hand things over to my staff. First, we've heard your request for more time to review and provide comments, and we truly appreciate your engagement. To support that, the public comment period has been extended, and it will now close on August 27th. More information will come out about this. I hope this extra time will allow you to submit comments and ask any questions you may have. Also, as you may know, Fibrosan began construction of their facility before we made a decision on the permit application. We take this seriously, and we have cited them for a violation of our pre-construction rule, Rule 201. We will be sharing more information about that during the presentation. Tonight, my team will walk you through how we evaluated the permit application, and we will review what the draft permit contains. I'll hand things over back to Caitlin to continue the meeting. Please feel free to ask questions, share your thoughts, and provide comments on the proposed air permit. I'll be here throughout the meeting and listening closely. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Caitlin, back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Annette. Appreciate those words and getting us kicked off for the evening. So at this point, I'm going to ask all of my panelists to turn on their cameras so we can, I don't know why this keeps jumping forward on me, apologies. So we can introduce them and see who you'll be hearing from tonight. First up, I want to introduce Jeff Collett. Jeff is the permit engineer for this project. You'll be hearing from him the most throughout the presentation tonight, and he will be talking you through his review and the steps that went into reviewing this proposed project. The other person you'll be hearing from during the presentation portion is Mariah Scott. Mariah is the inspector out of our Kalamazoo district office, and Mariah will be talking to everyone a little bit about what inspector's role is, what they do, and is a great resource for what our field staff does. So next up is Jim Haywood. Jim is one of our air modelers, and he's also a meteorologist here at EGLE. His role with permitting is to look at what pollutants a facility is proposing to emit or release into the atmosphere through a computer model and determine whether or not those would meet the air quality rules and regulations. We'll talk in more detail about that, but I did want to introduce Jim. Next up I have is Jessica Pantone. She is on the line. Jessica is one of our toxicologists here in the Air Quality Division. So the toxicologists look at the different types of chemicals and make determinations about what levels those chemicals are allowed under our rules and regulations. And last but not least is Cindy Hodges. Cindy is with our air monitoring section, and she's very familiar with our air monitoring stations throughout the state. So thanks everybody for turning your cameras on at this point. Everyone except for Jeff can go ahead and turn their cameras off. You'll be seeing our panelists again later. But Jeff, before I pass it over to you here a second, I do want to let everyone know that Anita Singh is also on the line with me, and you'll be seeing some information shared out into the chat that you might find useful, some links. I do want to caveat that some of the links are to My EnviroPortal, which is our online database to find things, and it is currently undergoing a patch right now, an update. So the information might not be available at this moment, but it should come up online here in the next couple of hours. And as Annette mentioned, the comment period was extended. So you'll be able to access that information at the latest tomorrow and it'll be at your fingertips. So with that in mind, too, we're going to get into our informational session here. Jeff is going to give his portion of this informational presentation. Once Jeff is done, I'll pass it over to Mariah. We'll answer your questions about inspections, and then we'll get into that back and forth portion of the evening tonight during those question and answers. As a reminder, we'll take your questions either until they're done or 7 o'clock, whichever comes first. And then we'll close out with the hearing portion of tonight. And we'll go over some of those ways to make an official comment in case you don't want to make a comment tonight. And then where to find that information, like I mentioned in my Enviro portal, which will be your primary place to find things. And then who to contact with further questions. So Jeff, I've got the agenda squared away. At this point, I am going to pass it over to you and you can get us into the presentation.
All right. Are we on the next slide? Yes.
Yep, looks great.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending this informational session and public hearing. My name is Jeff Collard, and I'm the permit engineer who reviewed the Fibrosan permit application. Before we talk about the application, I would like to go over what we do at the Air Quality Division, or AQD, and how the permitting process works. The AQD is dedicated to protecting public health and the environment. To do this, we use our authority under the state and federal laws to regulate sources of air pollution. To protect air quality, we do a lot of different things, such as monitoring levels of air pollutants, looking at toxic air contaminants to protect public health, conducting inspections of facilities, and reviewing applications and writing permits to make sure the proposed projects comply with state and federal rules. The AQD regulates and permits industrial sources. Additionally, we review permit applications based on what the facility is proposing. We are not able to address zoning, noise, or traffic. If you have questions or concerns about these issues, you will want to talk to your local government. When it comes to evaluating public comments on a permit application, it's important to hear the opinions of residents. However, we cannot base our decision to act on an application based on whether residents support or oppose the project or believe the project is necessary. We evaluate a project to ensure it meets the applicable air quality rules. If the project meets those rules, we are required to issue the permit. I'll briefly go over the permitting process now. First, a company decides to install or modify equipment that would release air pollutants. This often requires a permit to install called a PTI. The company then submits a permit application to the AQD through My Enviro portal. The application is then reviewed by an engineer like myself to decide if the request can meet state and federal air quality rules. Frequently, other air quality staff are involved to help with the review. If state and federal rules are met, the engineer creates a proposed permit. If the project goes out to public comment, such as in this case, the proposed permit is posted for the public to comment on. Public comment is a very important part of the permitting process, which is why we are talking with all of you today. Once the comment period ends, we review and evaluate the submitted comments. The comments can lead to changes in the permit and the final decision. Finally, a decision is made on the proposed permit. The permit can be approved without any changes, approved with changes based on comments, or denied. This decision is based on whether or not the company is This decision is based on whether or not what the company is requesting can meet the air quality regulations. Fibrosan is proposing a new facility which will manufacture fiber reinforced plastic sheets, or FRP sheets. They will be regulated as a major source of volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and a major source of hazardous air pollutants, or HAPs. The proposed facility will include the FRP sheet production area, a natural gas-fired boiler, and natural gas-fired space heaters and air rotation units. Fiberglass resin and gel coat are used in producing the FRP sheets. Acetone will be used as a cleanup solvent. When reviewing I think I'm going to skip a slide. Yeah, there we go. The proposed process for producing the FRP sheets involves applying layers of fiberglass gel coat and resin onto one of 6 long tables. The tables are approximately 10 feet wide by 200 feet long. Step 1 is applying the gel coat formulation with a dedicated mobile machine or robot. In step 2, a layer of PET film, which is a strong plastic sheet like Mylar, is applied over the gel coat layer. This is immediately followed by a layer of fiberglass resin, then another layer of PET film. The PET film layers and resin layer are applied by a dedicated mobile machine. After the fiber reinforced sheets have cured, which takes about 3.5 hours or so, a different dedicated mobile machine is used to trim the edges of the sheet with shear blades that don't generate dust. Once fully cured, the sheets are then wound into a coil for final shipment. When reviewing a permit application submitted by a company, the permit engineer works with other air quality staff. This work includes reviewing state and federal rules that apply to the project, evaluating the proposed emissions, an air toxics review to make sure toxic air contaminants meet our health-based screening levels, air modeling for criteria pollutants or toxic air contaminants when needed. The goal of our review is to make sure that the proposed Fibrosan facility can meet the required state and federal rules. What pollutants are regulated? An air pollutant is a substance released into the environment by various sources, including industrial facilities. There are 3 categories that a pollutant can fall into. The first group is called criteria pollutants. This contains 6 well-studied and regulated pollutants, such as sulfur dioxide, oxides of nitrogen, carbon monoxide, and particulate matter. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, sets national ambient air quality standards, referred to as NAAQS, for criteria pollutants to protect public health and the environment. Releases of these pollutants must be below the NAAQS. The second group is hazardous air pollutants, also known as HAPs. The current list of HAPs includes 188 pollutants which are known or suspected to cause health or environmental effects. We regulate these pollutants by applying federal rules known as NESHAPs and making sure that a facility will comply with the regulations. The third group of pollutants is known as toxic air contaminants, referred to as TACs. These are a group of pollutants that are covered by state rules, while the other 2 groups fall under federal regulations. Toxic air contaminants include almost any air pollutant that is not a criteria pollutant, including hazardous air pollutants. Based on Michigan rules, our toxicologists set health-based screening levels for TACs. These screening levels must be met by a facility. An important term for this proposed permit is major source. There's a federal rule written by EPA which defines a facility as a major source if its potential to emit of hazardous air pollutants is 10 tons per year of any individual HAP or 25 tons per year of total combined HAPs. Potential to emit is how much of a pollutant there would be if a company did not have an air permit to put restrictions and limitations on their manufacturing activities. Since Fibrosan, if permitted, will be a major source of HAPs, their proposed air permit was required to go through the public participation process. Many of the restrictions and limitations in the draft permit come from another federal rule, the National Emissions Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants, NESHAP, 4W, for reinforced plastic composites production. When writing this regulation, EPA looked closely at other companies doing the same thing, as well as testing of emissions and other factors to ensure a company who had to comply with this rule would remain protective of health, the environment, and limit hazardous air pollutants. The proposed Fibrosan facility is subject to NESHAP 4W for reinforced plastic composite production, and the requirements of this NESHAP are included in the proposed permit conditions. I'll now go into more detail about toxic air contaminants and their health-based screening levels. The screening levels are designed to protect against health issues such as developing cancer or breathing problems. When we performed our review, we looked at the maximum emission rates of all toxic air contaminants from the proposed Fibrosan facility. Our review determined the releases would not violate the health-based screening levels. More detail about the toxics review can be found in the technical fact sheet in My Enviro portal. Potential emissions from the processes in the proposed permit were calculated using worst-based assumptions. For the boiler and space heaters, Potential emissions were calculated assuming they operate 24 hours a day, 365 days per year at maximum capacity. For the FRP sheet production, we used established emission factors that match the emission factors required by NESHAP 4W, which is the federal rule the facility will be subject to. These emission factors were used to calculate how much of the HAPs in the fiberglass resin and gel coat are emitted from the process. For all other volatile compounds used in the FRP production, we assume they are 100% emitted. Acetone is used for cleanup of the process, and we assume 100% of the acetone, which is used and not reclaimed, is emitted. Under our state rules, we're required to make sure that facilities operate under the best available control technology, or BACT, for VOC emissions. For the proposed facility, Fibrosan completed a BACT analysis to explain how their proposed process would comply with BACT. For the FRP sheet production to comply with BACT, the draft permit requires application technology that minimizes emissions, contains limits on the amount of VOCs in their resin and gel coat, has a VOC emission limit, and has operational requirements for proper storage and handling of materials. The AQD reviewed Fibrosan's BACT cost analysis, which evaluated whether controlling VOC emissions would be practical and cost-effective. Controlling emissions require the emissions to be captured using hoods or enclosed areas, then sent to a device that destroys the VOCs. Fibrosan determined that it would be cost-prohibitive to control emissions from this process. The AQD reviewed Fibrosan's BACT cost analysis and agreed with their conclusions. Our air toxics review is performed using maximum potential emissions, which basically means worst-case emissions from the proposed process. As discussed earlier, the FRP sheet production must follow the federal NESHAP 4W rules, which are included in the permit and set limits on HAP use, along with operating, monitoring, and reporting requirements. The EPA has already reviewed NESHAP 4W through a residual risk and technology review and found that its requirements are protective of public health. Because of this, our state rules do not require another review of HAP emissions for the proposed project, since the EPA's review already covered those health impacts. The TACs that are not HAPs were then reviewed. We have a process under our rules for evaluating TAC emissions and their impacts to the outside air. Our evaluation determined that all TACs passed their health-based screening levels. Air modeling uses computers to predict the effects of air quality, the effects on air quality. Modeling is important to the permit review process because it tells us what concentrations of pollutants residents could be exposed to under the worst case scenarios. The modeling simulates a grid of virtual air monitors surrounding the facility. This allows the highest concentration to be considered. By worst case scenario, I mean the highest allowed emission rates, the weather conditions, and building downwash that cause the highest ground level impacts. A simple model known as a Screen 3 was performed as part of our TAC evaluation. Criteria pollutants were not modeled as their potential impacts are below the levels which require modeling under our rules. Once we finish reviewing the application, we draft a proposed permit. A permit is a document with conditions that the company must comply with. The permit conditions ensure that the project operates as described in the application and the way we reviewed it. This slide lists some of the requirements in Fibrosan's proposed project, in Fibrosan's proposed permit that are related to the project. The proposed permit conditions include emission limits on VOCs and HAPs, material limits on the resin and gel coat used, as well as material limits on the resin and gel coat, which are used as a practical way to restrict the potential to emit of the FRP sheet production process and ensure the VOC and HAP limits are met. The proposed permit conditions require Fibrosan to submit a nuisance minimization plan to establish procedures for operating in a manner that minimizes the release of odors to the outside air, establish procedures to be taken to address odor complaints, and develop a corrective action plan to address any odor releases to the outside air. The record-keeping requirements, which require monthly and 12-month rolling records to be kept, allow the district inspector to verify that Fibrosan is following their permit conditions and complying with their emission and material usage limits. And I'll now turn this over to District Inspector Mariah Scott.
Good evening. My name is Mariah Scott, and I am your district inspector from the Kalamazoo District, and I will be the inspector for this facility if the permit is approved. Districts are made of inspectors that go to facilities and they determine if a facility is in compliance with their permits, any applicable state or federal regulations. We do this by conducting inspections, reviewing reports, reviewing records, and investigating any complaints we receive. So if this permit for Fibrosan is approved, I would go on inspections, and how that would look is showing up unannounced, getting a tour of the facility, inspecting their equipment, their operations, any visible emissions, any odors. I would be verifying if they're operating as required by the permits and regulations as I'm touring the facility. I would also be obtaining information on monitoring and operations that they're doing in the facility, reviewing records as required by the permits and regulations. If approved, Fibrosan would qualify as a major source, and they would therefore have unannounced inspections at least every other year. They could have more inspections if there are reasons for concern. They would also be sending in reports for compliance multiple times a year, and additionally, there are some reports that are required if a certain threshold is reached in terms of an unexpected emission or a equipment malfunction. Air quality has a standard procedure for addressing odor complaints. This is available. I believe a link was sent out, but I can give more information if you would like. To be especially proactive, air quality would be requiring the facility to submit a nuisance minimization plan for odors. As Jeff was explaining, this would require the facility to proactively come up with procedures for maintaining and operating their reinforced plastic molding equipment in a way that minimizes odors to the outdoor air. It would have procedures in place to address odor complaints. It would have corrective actions planned if odor releases happen. So this is a proactive way for the facility to already be kind of ahead of the curve and prepared if there happens to be odor complaints. We would love to be especially proactive in terms of communicating with the community. So if the permit is approved, I will be emailing a copy of the facility's nuisance minimization plan for odors to all interested parties, which would include all the people attending the public hearing today. Annette mentioned, next slide, please. Annette mentioned that there was a violation notice that was sent out, and I'd love to give a little more information on that. The facility was found starting construction before having a permit or having a waiver to start construction before having a permit. This counts as a Rule 201 violation because they did more than land clearing. So a violation notice was issued. The facility responded very quickly within a day of being told that there was a Rule 201 violation, that they had stopped construction activities. They will have 21 days from the day the violation notice was sent to them to respond with their plan for action. The violation notice and the response will both be publicly available on my Enviro. And the violation notice does not stop the permit process from moving forward. I would be happy to answer more questions about inspections, complaint investigations, and our process, which moves us to Caitlin leading our Q&A session.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff and Mariah. Definitely appreciate all of the great content, great information that you guys gave about how the permitting process works. Mariah giving the additional information, because we did get a question in here about that, the construction that came on. So if the person who asked that question still has more, please put that into the chat, and we'd be happy to talk about that more. At this time, I'm going to ask the rest of my panelists to turn their cameras on so we can get into our question and answer portion of the night. Just as a reminder, if you've got questions, and we do have quite a few coming into the Q&A already, so thank you to those who have put those in, but you can type those right into that question and answer box, or if you'd like to ask that question verbally, you can use the raise hand icon in your Zoom toolbar. We'll try and bounce back and forth to get to as many questions as we can as well. If we do get folks that call in, which we don't have any at this time, I'll come back on and let those folks know how to ask a question at that time if they are on the phone. Okay, so the first question I am going to get into here is there was a few additional questions about the feasibility of an oxidizer. So Jeff, I'm going to pass that just back to you. Maybe if you could talk a little bit more about um, what an RTO is, a thermal oxidizer, what would be removed if they installed one of those, and kind of give a little bit more information on the rationale for our agreement with not having to install one. So if you could give more information on that, it would be great.
Yeah, understood. That's a good question. There are many types of thermal oxidizers that can be used to control VOC emissions from industrial sources. A regenerative thermal oxidizer, or RTO, is one that is often a good choice. It's effective at destroying VOCs, and it reuses a lot of the heat energy in it, so it doesn't take as much natural gas to operate. In the backed analysis performed by Fibrosan and submitted, it's a document you can see in my Enviro portal. They looked at different options and evaluated whether it would be feasible to install the RTO. We have a backed is a top-down process, a 5-step process as outlined by EPA, and we looked at what's feasible, what could work, and then we do also look at is it cost effective for the process. We can't mandate control just because we'd like to see it controlled. We have to look at the backed cost evaluation. We double checked the numbers Fibrosan ran, and we came to the same determination that it would be very difficult to implement and very cost prohibitive. The process, the large room with the 6 long tables, it's a big area, and to capture all those emissions requires either a very large fan to catch all the emissions and suck them out to an RTO, or a complicated fugitive enclosure to catch all those emissions and route them to an RTO. So we looked at all those things. We double checked their numbers, we ran our own numbers, and we determined it was not practical for this facility.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate that answer on here. Going to shift the next question over to Cindy, actually. So Cindy, there's just a question about monitoring stations. Will there be any, and if Jeff has to add anything onto that too, but maybe you could talk about where the closest air monitoring station is in the Kalamazoo area, just so folks are aware of that.
Yes, we do have a monitoring station in Cassopolis that is about 2 miles from where the facility is proposed to be built. And if you want to find out information on that, you can go to My Air and see the concentrations of that.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy. Yeah, we'll put the link to the My Air website into the chat so folks can take a peek at the monitoring station in that area, or just any of the other monitors throughout the state. You can also see what pollutants are monitored there too, so you can get that real-time information on the My Air website. So thank you, Cindy. Okay. So the next question here I'm going to get into is, Jeff, this is going to come to you, and then if Jim has anything to add on it, we'll ask him too. So this person is talking specifically about some emission factors for the estimate for their backed limit. So first off, maybe you can explain what the AP2 emission factors are for those who don't know. But then they're wondering, why those were used, are those acceptable to use, and why not some of the other things like the lowest achievable emission rate or such were not used in the review. So maybe you could talk about that.
Okay, no, understood.
And Jeff, you are muted.
Yes,
There you
somehow
go.
I got
Perfect.
muted. We try to make sure we evaluate emissions conservatively, meaning like worst case emissions for the process. Like I said, for the boiler and natural gas combustion source at the facility, there are AP42 emission factors, and we assume the emissions are from those processes being run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. For the open molding producing of the FRP sheets, we use the emission factors from something called the UEF emission factor table, established in, I think the update was in 2009. And those emission factors match the emission factors used in the niche app 4W. Basically, the more volatiles you have in a resin or a gel coat, the more is emitted from the process. Also, the type of applicator technology you use. If you use an applicator technology that volatilizes more of the resin or gel coat, you get more emissions. So we evaluated using the UEF table, which we consider to be accurate and probably conservative in this case. The FRP sheets, the process, the resin is placed and it's immediately covered by the PET sheets. That allows them to qualify for a what's called covered cure, which means you have slightly less emissions. You're covering a 10-foot wide sheet, so that really likely controls emissions even more than what we're considering in the emission factors. So these are established emission factors, and we have confidence in them, and we believe that they are accurate or leaning towards overestimating emissions, not leaning towards underestimating emissions. And if someone has a more detailed, more specific question, please send that in and I can get a response to that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeff. So the person that asked that was pretty detailed in there, and I may not have covered exactly what you asked. So if you want to send that one to Jeff, he might be able to talk you through some of those very specifics of those EPA emission factors as well. So the next question, I'm going to actually give Jeff a break here and transition to a couple questions for Mariah. So Mariah, the first question that came in, it was about that construction activities that were happening. So the questioner notes that we did mention that they were cited for breaking ground, but they want to know if that means all construction has paused until the permit is approved, or if approved in this case. So we haven't approved the permit yet. So I just want to make that very clear. This is still a draft proposed permit. Give that question to you first, Brian.
So I was hearing the question was, what construction activities have occurred so far, and what will happen before the permit is approved?
Yeah, and if the construction will be paused until we make a determination on whether the permit will be approved.
Okay. So we received information that construction had started, and so I went and did an inspection at the site. I saw the footings for kind of their larger whole plan for the building, and then the steel structure for what seemed to be the area that would be kind of the offices. I informed the people on site as well as the facility that this was a violation of Rule 201, because according to the current Air Quality Division definition of starting construction, it's kind of anything beyond clearing land. They emailed me back that they had ceased construction activities. That is the email that I have received, but their full response will be available publicly as their violation notice response. So at the moment, construction has ceased, and they are aware that further construction would be a violation of Rule 201. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mariah, for that great answer. Appreciate that. I'm going to stick with you for just a couple more questions here. So the next question that came in was about inspections. So you talked kind of about the inspection frequency, and that, be at a minimum of every 2 years, unless there was other indications for more frequent inspections. Perhaps you could give just a little bit more detail on what those inspections look like, what would necessitate a more frequent inspection, those type of examples. Would an odor complaint or other things kind of necessitate that increased frequency of inspections?
Okay, so what an inspection looks like is I show up at the facility unannounced. I introduce myself, tell them I'm part of EGLE, and we kind of do an initial meeting where I learn from the facility, like, all the parts of their process, hear if there's been any abnormal conditions to report that they maybe haven't previously reported, There are different requirements of essentially how abnormal a condition is of when they have to report it. If there's any new equipment at the facility since their last inspection or their last permit, and then I get a whole tour of the facility. I walk through with them, pointing out all the equipment. I ask all the questions I want to ask. I have a copy of the permit point by point with me and a full copy of the permit, and we go through every single condition in the permit. So when you look at my inspection reports, it is basically it's all the conditions in the permit, and then if they appear compliant and why they appear compliant. So if it's based on what I saw, it would say what I saw that made them appear compliant. If it's based on a record I received, it would have a description of what in that record made them appear compliant, and then the record that I received would also be connected to the inspection report. Assuming there wasn't some reason it was confidential, for example, if I had like financial information from the facility or some proprietary information, then it would just reference that there was a confidential document, and kind of the basic description of why, but that's very rare. And so then the inspection reports, which are quite lengthy, but if you ever had any questions about an inspection report I wrote, please email me with your questions. I'd be happy to walk through a permit requirement with you or an inspection report with you. So that is how those inspections go. So it's the tour of the facility, it's a request of the records, and it's me writing up the report. If there was a complaint investigation, typically those investigations focus more on the complaint itself, and investigating that concern. It could go into a larger facility tour if there was reason to believe that the whole permit compliance needed to be assessed. But typically, like if there was an odor complaint, I would go around the facility, determine if it seemed to be the facility causing the odor or if it was something nearby that could have been the cause. I would be talking to the complainant, asking if they want to be anonymous or not, asking how much information they want from me, because I have some complainants that simply kind of want to report what they observed. I have some complainants who view it like me as a continued conversation. So that would be a complaint investigation. And if there was something in the records I was receiving that had discrepancies or a reason to believe that their emissions have been exceeded, that could also prompt a additional inspection. So that's not every reason there might be inspections above the every other year, but those are some examples of what would cause additional inspections or complaint investigations. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you, Mariah. Appreciate that. I'm going to do one more question from the chat, and then I know we've got some hands up, so I do want to get to those. This one is going to start off a little bit with you, Mariah, and then kind of circle back to Jeff here. So the question is about those odors that we were talking about, specifically styrene odors. So Mariah, if you could maybe talk about Rule 901 and what that entails for the unreasonable interference with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property, because this person mentions that. And then Jeff, maybe you could talk about how odors were evaluated in the permit application.
Yes, so Rule 901, it seems like the person who asked the question was familiar with the rule, but if you haven't heard of that rule before, Rule 901 is a rule that a facility can't cause an emission that would cause an injurious health effect on animals, human health and safety, animal life, plant life of significant economic value, the plant life of significant economic value, or interfere with reasonable enjoyment of your life or property. We have a rule that says that facilities can't interfere with your reasonable enjoyment of your home, of your business. If you're experiencing odors that are interfering with that, and that could be based on the intensity of the odor, how often it's occurring, how long it's occurring. Those are kind of the things that we're assessing to see if it's causing an unreasonable interference with the enjoyment of your property. And the reason I'm focusing on the last part of it is because the emissions have already been modeled. Usually if I get an odor investigation, it's more about, this just smells really bad and I can't enjoy my home or I can't enjoy my business. So that's the reason that I'm focusing on the enjoyment of property. So that would be kind of what would prompt an odor investigation and would prompt me to do a complaint investigation where I would have a conversation with you about intensity, duration, frequency, and then go out if it's actively occurring and verify it.
And for any evaluation of odors during the application, we don't have a set process for doing that. Every facility is a little bit different, and there's no way we can predict if there's going to be odors or not. I know Fibrosan designed their stacks to be at least 1.5 times the building height to help with dispersion, and something we didn't used to include in our permits, but we are now including them for any new major HAPA source, this fiberglass, is the nuisance minimization plan. So if there are any odors, there's a pathway set already in the permit to address them and to get the company to take action on that.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff. And Mariah, and as Mariah mentioned too, if this permit gets approved, she'd be sharing out that nuisance minimization plan. Okay, I'm going to shift over to get to some of the hands up that we have in the chat here and to the audience. So the first hand I have up is Victor Smolinski. Victor, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and then you should be able to unmute yourself, and you should be able to ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, could you explain who might perform any measurement of styrene and methyl methacrylate to ensure compliance with EPA RSL guidelines, regional screening levels with THQ scores of like 0.1, hopefully, but definitely less than 1 across at least air, but hopefully air, water, and soil? And how often, if ever, this get done? Because my understanding is that they monitoring stations are not going to carry sensors to collect any empirical data on these chemicals in the air. But correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you. That's my question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victor. Yeah, Jeff, if you want to go ahead and answer that one, and then maybe if Jim has anything to add from a modeling perspective, that would be great too.
Yeah, Victor, we don't have, in the proposed permit conditions, we don't have any testing conditions for verifying the amount of styrene that's emitted, the amount of methyl methacrylate or MMA that's emitted from the open molding process. The NESHAP that the facility will be required to follow sets material limits, it sets operational and procedure restrictions, and EPA did the residual risk and technology review on that and determined that facilities that comply with all those requirements have emissions from them that are protective of health. So that is what we're relying on, and we're following what EPA tested and our rules, which instruct us to rely on the federal rules for that in this process. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. Jim, I just wanted to give you an opportunity if there's anything from a modeling perspective that you had to add onto that as well.
Well, to go back to the monitoring station, I believe he is correct that monitoring station really just monitors for ozone. And Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So it is not directly measuring the speciated pollutants that will be coming out of the facility. Now, that said, those VOCs are considered to be a precursor for ozone development. Right now, that area is considered to be in attainment for ozone. Should that change, and we hope that it does not, then we have to go in and we have to look at everything in the area that would emit the VOCs and take proper corrective actions for what we call a state implementation plan. But at this time, hopefully we don't see that happening. As far as the modeling, going to that question, Jeff mentioned the 1.5 stack height. That is something that we look at. If you can visualize an air going over a building, on the downwind side of a building, the air gets drawn down. And so we like to have a stack that's high enough that it does not get caught in that downwash, as we call it. Because when that happens, you don't really get the opportunity for those pollutants to disperse and get diluted. You want to get that up into the atmosphere to where nature can take it and tear it apart and diffuse it. So that's pretty much it from the modeling perspective. We wanted to make sure that the stack was high enough that we didn't run into that situation where we had those nasty downwashes.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff and Jim, for those answers. Much appreciated. We do want to get to another hand that we have up, Ann Killian. Ann, I'm going to unmute you and you should be able to ask your question. You may have to unmute yourself first on your end too. Ann, are you there? See, you're unmuted on my end.
Oh,
Yep, we can hear you, Ann.
oh, hi. I put these also in the chat, but I was just I have a couple of questions. One is on the company came in, they violated the clearing of the land and started construction without having the permit. How do you trust them moving forward? um I just don't believe it's a good start, coming into a new community where you don't know anyone and you're kind of throwing your big corporate America around in this little small town. So I just am curious, as far as you guys look at this company and they're really starting out on bad footing, actually.
Yeah, Ann, thank you for that question. I'm gonna have Mariah talk a little bit about how our potential enforcement process works and the resolution. She's, as was mentioned, we sent a violation notice to the company for the beginning of construction. Mariah, maybe you could talk a little bit about their explanation, on how that works for them responding to that violation notice.
Thank you so much for your question, Anne. So to give a little background beyond just Fibrosan, the EPA recently is working on a memo to redefine what they consider the start of construction. And I know the company's intentions, but it could have been that they were confused by this EPA level memo about kind of redefining what the start of construction is. But air quality has not adopted that draft of a redefinition. We're sticking currently with our old definition. So I don't know the company's intention, but there could have been a miscommunication. We'll find out in their violation notice response what their intentions were and why they started construction. But I do know that upon arriving saying, hey, this is a violation of Rule 201, less than 24 hours later, they were saying, oh, well, you'll stop construction activities. And like I said, I don't know exactly what the company's intentions were or why they started construction. But I do know that air quality learned that construction was started. We did an inspection. We sent a violation notice. We got in touch with the company and they proactively pretty promptly responded. So that just kind of points to me the benefit of having a connection between the company, air quality, the community, all the way around between all interested stakeholders. I think I will also just add, I believe I touched on in the past about how the major construction was on the areas that would have been the office buildings. So I wonder if that was also maybe part of the story, is that they weren't putting steel frame up yet of the buildings that would have held emission units per se. So again, we'll wait for the violation notice response and get more information. Both violation notice and the response will be publicly available on my Enviro. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mariah. I was just going to mention too, check out my Enviro portal as soon as we get that in. It will be posted online and publicly available, so you can read that response for yourself. I'm going to get to one more hand before I pop back over to the questions in the Q&A box. So the next question, hand up I have is John Nicolini. John, go ahead. I'm going to unmute you. You should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Anne, thank you for saying exactly what I was going to say, or going to ask. They broke the public trust. If we have information about them continuing construction without a permit, who do we contact? And then also, Anne, this isn't corporate America. They're from Turkey. The company's not even from America. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. Great question. We will be supplying you with the contact information for who to contact if they do continue construction, and that would be Mariah. Mariah would be the correct person to contact. We will be sharing out Mariah's contact information as well as everybody else here on the panel to get that in, as well as you can also submit a complaint in My Enviro portal as well. And that can be done for any site around the state in My Enviro portal. So those would be options for you to submit that if you see the continuation of construction. Okay, I'm going to transition back over here to some of the questions that are coming in here into the question and answer box here. So question here, I just accidentally scrolled past it. So question here, I'm going to pass it on to you actually, Jim. Question is about how we evaluated and looked at the HAP emissions, HAP releases, since we don't have any monitoring data in that area, and they're talking specifically about, the wind direction. Could predominant wind direction might blow the HAP emissions away from the nearest monitoring station. So if you could talk about kind of how the modeling looks at that with conjunction with the monitoring station information, that would be great.
Okay, yeah, I'm scrolling through the questions here, and I do see a lot of things in there about air monitoring. Honestly, when we look at this, it's almost like you're shutting the barn door after the horse is out by worrying about air monitoring after the fact. If we have a concern that there will be a violation of the air monitor, we want to catch that before the permit gets put out. The department has to be convinced that this facility will not cause or contribute to any kind of a violation. And that's where our modeling comes in. We've got several different ways we can do the modeling. For this particular project, I believe a lot of it was done via the lookup tables. Now, those lookup tables are created using the most conservative screening tool that we have out there. I mean, it is the catch-all of everything. If it passes that, then we know that the impacts are going to be really, really small. There was one pollutant that did not pass that lookup table, so we went directly to a screen model where we put in more realistic assumptions into that screen model, run that. Those screen models are designed to give you far worse than what you would ever expect to see in reality. And so that's why we like to use them when we can, because we know they're very conservative. They take the worst case, and they make us feel very good when the results come in underneath any of the thresholds. And if that doesn't work, and we did not have to do this for this particular project, we do what we call refined modeling. And that is basically modeling to the exact standards of the facility, where you're actually trying to replicate what's really happening out there when that pollutant hits the air. All cases, we look at worst case meteorology. You factor in the worst possible emissions that they could possibly emit under the permit. You put that in, you assume that that's what they're emitting 24/7. You look at the worst case meteorology, you look at the building downwash, which I had discussed a little bit earlier. You pile those up with just really lots and lots and lots of those virtual monitors. We put them everywhere. We space them 75 feet apart. And so we know each one of those monitors, those virtual monitors, if they pass, what's going to happen in real world scenarios is going to be less than that. And so that's really kind of a thumbnail shot of what we do when we look at the modeling. And again, we want to catch that before the permit is issued, rather than try to catch it after the fact with the modeling, or I'm sorry, the monitoring.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. I know it's 7 o'clock. I'm gonna do one more question to Jeff here, but I do want to acknowledge we got a couple questions that came in about monitoring of the water quality and disposal in that area as well. And unfortunately, the perspective of this proposed project project is just looking at the air emissions. So we would have to refer you over to our Water Resources Division or our Materials Management Division for questions related to those types of things. But I do want to acknowledge that we did get quite a few questions in there about those things, as well as some things like taxes, which are just outside of the scope of what we can answer at, here tonight. Jeff, the last question I want to ask for you as we wrap up our question and answer portion, since it is 7 o'clock, is there a point at which they would be required to install an RTO?
Yes, there is both both under the federal regulations and under air quality's backed review for VOCs. Under the federal regulations, if they hit a certain threshold, they're mandated to have 95% control. If they do expand, they will likely be over that threshold. Shortly, that threshold is 100 tons per year, and then they're mandated to have control. Also, so that's just on the federal rules. On our state rules, as they expand, also generally when you have more VOC emissions, you have it becomes more cost effective to control them. So yeah, the short answer is yes. If they were to expand, they likely would need to put in some sort of control device and some sort of site improvements to capture those emissions, send them into a thermal oxidizer for destruction.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate that answer and appreciate all of the answers from our panelists this evening. I do know there are quite a few questions still in the question and answer box and some hands up that we unfortunately were not able to get to tonight because we do have to move on to our hearing portion of the evening. So if you had a question in the question and answer box, we will do our best to get back to you after the meeting tonight. So at this time, our panelists can go ahead and you can turn off your camera, and I'm going to ask Annette to come back on as we move over to our hearing portion of the evening. So as we get into this hearing portion of the evening for the public comment, you might be wondering to yourself, what can I make a comment about? So while we welcome all comments of any type. Comments can be related to how the permit was written, what regulations are included, conditions that are specifically outlined in the proposed permit. And those types of things will have the greatest impact on the outcome of the action. So we do recommend that you be as specific as possible on any comments that you have about the proposed draft permit. Focusing on the content and the basis of the permit. However, nothing is out of bounds. You can comment on anything that you would like. But commenting on those specific changes, like I'd like to see more testing, you have a couple of typos in these specific line items will make a greater impact. Oops, Jeff, if you want to reshare your screen, we'll keep that up there actually. Looks like you took your share down. Otherwise, I can quick reshare mine. Hold on. Apologies for the technical difficulties here. Okay, perfect. So comments that are less likely to lead to changes are things outside of the scope of the draft permit. So the Air Quality Division does not have any jurisdiction over zoning, truck traffic, and noise, and whether or not this proposal is directly supported by the community. Moving along here. Okay, next slide here. Okay, so now we are going to move into the hearing portion of the evening tonight. And with that, as I mentioned, we welcome all of your comments. However, during this portion, we will not be responding to any of your questions. If you ask a question during this time, the time that we had for dialogue was during the question and answer portion of the evening. But before we get into that, I do have an official hearing statement that I have to read for you, so bear with me as I read that aloud. So good evening and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Caitlin DeVries and I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EGLE, and I will be the hearing officer tonight. Annette Switzer, Air Quality Division Director, is the decision maker for this permit application, listening to your comments this evening. She will be considering all comments before making a decision. This hearing is related to a request from Fibrosan Incorporated, located at 1805 Follett Drive, Cassopolis, Michigan. Fibrosan is proposing to build a new facility that will manufacture white fiber reinforced plastic FRP sheets, which are used in the RV industry to make sidewalls. The Air Quality Division regulates sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on public health and the environment. The law governing those responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Before the company can install and operate any new equipment, it must obtain a permit that meets the requirements of Michigan's air quality laws. This means the equipment must be capable of meeting state and federal emission standards, including health-based standards. The proposed air permit must also contain conditions that include emission limits and specific ways of monitoring the equipment to ensure these standards are met. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to allow anyone interested in the proposed permit to provide information we can use in deciding whether to approve the permit or if there are additional issues to consider. The proposed permit is still a draft permit. This does not mean a decision has been made. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposal. We hope having the details of the draft permit will help you provide comment. Everything in the draft permit remains open for comment and further consideration, including whether the permit will be granted at all. As we review comments, we can only use the information you provide to make changes if it is within our authority. For example, comments about local zoning, truck traffic, and noise cannot be considered as part of our decision. Some of you may simply want to express your support or opposition to the proposed project. We are happy to note your position, but please understand that the department is, by law, not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the proposed project. This hearing is being recorded and your comments will be part of the information we consider when making a decision. The public comment period began on June 25, 2026. As previously mentioned, the Air Quality Division received a request to extend the comment period beyond the original end date of July 30th. The Air Quality Division approved that extension, making the closing date of the comment period midnight on August 27, 2026. Additional comments or information may be submitted via written or verbal comment during this hearing by email or by voicemail. After the public comment period closes, all written and verbal comments will be reviewed. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point the decision maker makes the final decision. The decision maker may deny the permit, approve as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions of the draft permit, if any, have been changed in the final permit and the reasons for the change. In all three scenarios, and all interested parties, including everyone on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comment during the public comment period and/or attended the public hearing, will be directly notified of the decision. The mailing will include a letter from the decision maker regarding the decision and, if applicable, the approved permit. Please recognize our staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed project and listen to your comments. As a reminder, you do not need to comment tonight to have your comment be considered. You may submit a written comment at any time during the comment period by U.S. Post or email, or you may call into comment to the public comment voicemail. I'll go over how to do that after the hearing. Those who have joined us online may submit your comment in writing tonight by typing the word comment into your question box, and that will be read aloud. We will limit your comment time to 3 minutes if you are speaking. I will let you know when you have 30 seconds left. I will begin by calling the names of the people who have indicated they would like to make a verbal comment tonight. Once we get through that initial list, anyone else who would like to comment will be able to do so, even if you have not already indicated that you would like to make a comment when you registered for the meeting. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to pull up the list of those that we have ready for comment. I will click on mute for you to make your comment, and at that point is when your time will start. So the first person that I have on my list is Lauren Hodges. Lauren, let us find you here in the audience, and we will unmute you if you are on tonight. I am not. There you are, Lauren. You are unmuted. You should be able to unmute yourself and make your comment. Lauren, you are unmuted on our end. You might have to click unmute on your computer to unmute yourself. Lauren, I'm still not seeing you unmute. Just gonna click a button to see if you can retry here. Okay, looks like Lauren might be having some issues. We're not able to hear her. So Lauren, we will try and circle back to you if you are able to get your line unmuted, but I will move on to our next commenter, which is Brian Lazara. So Brian, we will find you in the audience as well and get you unmuted if you are on tonight. Looking for Brian. Doesn't look like Brian is on with us tonight. Okay. Moving to our next commenter, which is Laura Liss. Laura, you are unmuted on our end. You should be able to go ahead and make your comment when you're ready.
Hello, thank you everyone for the time tonight. My name is Laura Liss. My family owns a home on the Diamond Lake, which is in Cassopolis, Michigan, where this facility is proposed. Our home is about 2.5 miles from the Fibrosan facility. I am a proponent of reasonable and responsible economic development. However, I am opposed to permitting a new major source of hazardous air pollutants near homes, schools, beaches, and heavily used recreational areas without requiring the most effective technology. I have heard tonight about the BACT, the BACT standard. However, there is so much development near this facility that we would really encourage EGLE to think twice about deciding that cost is somehow an important enough factor to allow that to drive this decision, right? There's not only Diamond Lake in the area, we have Stone Lake, we have downtown Cassopolis, where there's been a significant economic improvement that draws more people to that area than ever before, right? We are really asking that we want, the regenerative thermal oxidizer technology or something equally equivalent to be installed. And we would really, really want the implementation of ongoing, local site-specific collection and analysis of the styrene emissions. Because as we talked about earlier in this meeting, right, that does not exist in Cassopolis. We have the collection of ozone in Cassopolis that was noted. However, while that is a precursor to ozone, it's not actually the same, right? And by the time that we know that there's an ozone issue and it rises to that level, it's frankly going to be too late because it's going to have had such an impact on the community, right? And it's very difficult to get any business to go backwards in their development when they've invested millions of dollars into doing a whole facility, right? So cost savings for the company should not come at the expense of decades of future avoidable exposure of known health risks and potential harm to our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. The next person I have on my list is Kelly Ball. Kelly, looks like you're unmuted. And just as a reminder, I forgot to mention this before, if you could please state your name and any affiliation you had for the record as well. Kelly, looks like you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Caitlin. And my name is Kelly Ball. I'm the president of the Diamond Lake Association. I represent nearly 1,000 homes we're about a half mile south of this site is the closest area of the lake. And we've submitted written comments with 5 requests. And we're hoping each one of those gets addressed in the response as this moves forward. And, the reality is this facility is going next door to senior centers, schools, and neighborhoods. These are places where children and older adults and families spend long hours outdoors in the summer with windows open. And as we mentioned earlier, Michigan's Rule 901 prohibits emissions that unreasonably interfere with people's comfortable enjoyment of life and property. That rule is already in this permit. It's General Condition 6. So the standard's there, but what's missing is any determination of whether that will be met. Styrene can be smelled at concentrations well below the numbers these health standards are built around, which means the facility can comply with every number in this permit and still fail the test Rule 901 sets. So compliance and interference are 2 different questions, and this record currently only answers one of them. And that's really our difficulty. We cannot tell whether Rule 901 is satisfied, and neither can anyone else outside this agency, because the 2 analyses that would answer it are not in the public record. So the dispersion modeling that shows where these emissions will go is not public, and the cost analysis that decided against the thermal oxidizer is not public. So we have 5 requests. The first one is, let's put the dispersion and exposure analysis to the public record and make sure it's in plain terms and make sure that we understand how these emissions will be flowing to the schools, Council on Aging, various areas in our area. Our second one is make Rule 901 odor determination before construction, not after complaints. So this permit requires a nuisance minimization plan. That plan isn't due until 45 days after the permit issues, and it only gets revisited after an odor event happens. Nobody ever decides in advance whether this will cause a problem. And so we're asking you to decide that now, because that answer could still change something. We'd love to have numbers verified after startup. So every figure is a calculation. So nothing's been measured because the plant doesn't exist. So we want to make sure that happens. We also would like the release of the control technology analysis. The fact sheet says that it's the most technically feasible, but it wasn't economically viable. That decision is why 84 tons of styrene leaves this building untreated rather than being destroyed. So I think that's very important that we understand how that was derived. And then I think we need to write the assumptions into enforceable conditions. The permit already contains material limits and emission limits and record keeping. And what it doesn't contain is a way back in. If actual emissions or actual offsite conditions turn out to be different
30 seconds left, Kelly.
Absolutely. What was assumed here, EGLE should be able to reopen this and permit and act without waiting for a violation or the Title V cycle. So thank you for your consideration and taking the time to make the record complete and the conditions enforceable so that 3 years from now, nobody here is told nothing can be done.
Great. Thank you for your comment, Kelly. The next commenter I have on my list is Kelly Esch. Kelly, when you are ready, you are unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and make your comment.
Hi, good evening. Thank you guys for your time. Can you hear me okay?
We can. You sound great.
Wonderful. My name is Kelly Esch, and I'm a resident of Cassopolis. I also live on Diamond Lake with my family, living near this proposed project. I'm speaking to you guys tonight to urge EGLE to deny or significantly amend the permit to install the Fibrosan package 0001103. The facility is classified as a major source of hazardous air pollution, permitting, like Kelly Ball had said, 84 tons of styrene and actually 120 tons of volatile organic compounds annually, just a quarter a mile away from residential neighborhoods, schools, the Center on Aging, and the local community. Along with our agricultural land, poses an unacceptable risk to our community's public health. Styrene is a known neurotoxin and respiratory irritant. And as a 25-year nurse, our families will bear the brunt of these emissions. I'm asking EGLE's current air monitoring system, which is entirely inadequate for this project, to be, the missed my line. The nearest regional ozone monitor cannot track localized chemical plumes from this specific plant. If this facility is allowed to operate, the community has no real-time way of knowing if Fibrosan is violating its emissions limits. Therefore, I formally request that EGLE take the following actions before any final permit is issued. First, to mandate the installation of continuous localized fence line air monitoring stations at the MEC Smart Park boundaries to track styrene and VOCs. Conduct a comprehensive cumulative impact study that accounts for the combined emissions of both Fibrosan and the existing heavy industry that is already there, like Norsk Hydro. Our community deserves transparent, localized safety data, not regional approximities. Please protect the residents of Cassopolis, their agricultural land, and Diamond Lake by withholding this permit until these safety measures are legally binding. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, our next commenter that we have up here is Robert Overholzer. Robert, looks like you are unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment.
Okay, thank you for allowing us to speak here. I just wanted, I guess the first item I wanted to kind of correct, or I shouldn't say correct, but
Robert, and could you state your name and any affiliation you have for the record?
Sure. My name is Robert Overholzer. I am a resident of Cassopolis, and I live on Diamond Lake. I live less than a half a mile away from the Fibrosan plant. And the one thing I wanted to make clear is that it's not just the offices. The entire superstructure of the building is already built. And I guess I wonder if they didn't continue on building. I don't know if you guys have been back there since Mariah had done her inspection, but I was over there Sunday and the entire superstructure is out there. It's all steel. It's ready for the sides and the roof from what I can tell. I'm not a construction guy, but anyway, the other thing is we have never heard what the cost of an RTO is. Jeff had mentioned that, it was difficult to do. You'd have to have a big fan to kind of accumulate everything. I'm sorry, but that just doesn't sound real expensive. I think when you're talking about people's health, you really need to consider, the cost, because this is a Turkish company. They're coming in here to manufacture in the United States for the first time. And here we are just letting them violate a permit and also not have for their own factories. In fact, I'm just going to read you a little bit because I wrote it down. Okay, so Fibrosan is a Turkish company, and for the first time, they'll be manufacturing here. I think it's disappointing that Fibrosan proposes a major VOC HAP polluting source in Cassopolis, while Fibrosan publicly touts an RTO achieving 98.2% VOC removal at its own existing manufacturing operation. Why isn't comparable technology being installed here? So according to Fibrosan, their RTO system collects production gases, VOCs, through a 60,000 meter per hour exhaust system and achieves 98.2% removal. In addition, they state that the RTO recovers about 1,000 kilowatts of thermal energy, which they reuse to supply and process hot water, reducing natural gas consumption. So why aren't we requiring that here in the United States when they do it in Turkey? This is silly that we let this happen like this. If Fibrosan says RTO is economically unreasonable, then EGLE should ask them to disclose the cost analysis and reconcile it with Fibrosan's claim that its existing RTO recovers heat and reduces natural gas consumption.
Got about 30 seconds left, Robert.
Okay. The last thing I'll say is besides the VOCs emitted by Fibrosan, one very key concern is the VOCs and odors released by the FRP plant. The mission of EGLE is stated to be to protect Michigan's environment and public health by managing air, water, land, and energy resources. I do not believe the approval of this permit is accomplishing your intended mission. In addition, the general conditions of the permit state as follows. Operation of this equipment shall not result in the emission of an air contaminant which causes injuries, affects the human health or safety, animal life, plant life of significant economic value or property, or which causes unreasonable interference with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property. It
You are
appears
at
that
about time, Robert.
Fibrosan-
If you could wrap your comment up, that would be great.
Okay, it appears that Fibrosan would be in violation of this important general condition of the permit. I do not believe that this permit at all considers the unfavorable impact on property values and the unfavorable outdoor impact of styrene odors. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate your comment. Okay, the next person I have on my list is Phil Hallier. Phil, you are unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and make your comment.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for the hearing and your time this evening. I'll try not to be too repetitive with prior speakers. I'm also a resident on Diamond Lake and also a member of the Diamond Lake Association board. I think what stands out to me about this particular permit, understanding that, your job is to look at government regulations such as they are, is that many similarly situated polluting facilities are located in industrial corridors. And what stands out here is the close proximity of this facility to the Center for Aging, a newly proposed vocational school, which is being built, hundreds of yards away from the facility. The proximity to recreational areas. There's been a massive investment of government dollars into the development of the Stone Lake area in downtown Cassopolis, the Diamond Lake, and all of the outdoor activities. Government regulations cover a broad set of scenarios. They're imperfect. We understand that. No government regulation structure and framework is perfect. The current one certainly is not. We have a company coming in, sizing phase one of the project with the maximum allowable pollutants, pretty close to the maximum allowable of the regulations. But it's important to note that at 84 tons of styrene gas a year, it is 8 times the amount that the threshold upon which something becomes a major polluter. So this is a very extremely large amount of pollutants in a very delicate area near not only the areas I mentioned, but farms, livestock, and others. We have a lot of extreme winds in the area. And not only, as Kelly mentioned, is styrene a suspected carcinogen, it has an extremely strong odor. And the likelihood under the variety of wind conditions that there are going to be smells and odors.
Phil, you have about 30 seconds left.
Throughout these areas is extremely high. And in a day and age when there are mitigating technologies, putting a facility at this level near these areas does not seem in the public's best interest. In addition, we would like to see the concentration levels. All modeling is flawed, but we would like to see the concentration levels in and around these areas that I've mentioned so that we can make a determination and it can become part of the public record. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, the next name I have on my list for comments is Victor Smolinski. Victor, you are unmuted on our end. If you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and make your comment.
Hi, thank you. So I think besides the toxicity of these chemicals, I think many of these chemicals have also are highly flammable, and they are explosive in under certain conditions. I don't think we've seen how they plan to store these chemicals, how they plan to control the environment, and I'm not sure that this community, as far as first responders are, equipped to respond to an industrial accident. Also wonder, what the error, what the margin of error is in on average in the modeling that's being done, what the standard deviations are. Because ultimately 98.14 tons is very close to 100 tons, very close. So close that perhaps a simple error, calculation error would be enough to tip it over the rule that triggers the 95% reductions. I'm not sure this community is prepared for something like that. That's all I have to say. Thank you. And definitely opposed to something like this. I'm also a resident of the area. I live in Fox Street. So an industrial accident, I mean, how does human error factor into any of this? Typically, human error is one of the things that accounts for most industrial accidents. And you cannot really account for that in estimates and calculations and models. And no model can ever be completely accurate. That's also a fact. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, the last name I have on my list before we get to anyone else who would like to make a comment is John Nicolini. So John, looks
I
like you are
already
unmuted.
spoke. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Supporting everyone around the lake. The tax dollars, the reason this company came here is because the infrastructure supports it and the land is cheap. And who paid for that infrastructure? I just urge you, please, to keep that in mind when you deny this application. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, John. Okay, I have made it through the list of those who pre-registered at requesting to make a comment. So at this point, anyone else who would like to make a comment can go ahead and raise your hand, and we will get to you in the order that we see your hands up. And I do see that I have two phone-in listeners. If you want to do *9, that will raise your hand, and we can unmute you if you would like to make a question if you are on the phone. So the first name I have up here is Dale Kluga. Dale, I'm going to unmute you and you should be able to make your comment. As a reminder to state your name and any affiliation you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay. So let me be more direct. And this is not directed at EGLE by any means. I've worked with EGLE for many years. I've been coming to Diamond Lake now for almost 50 years. We own property on Shore Acres Road, about a quarter mile from this plant. And so this is just to acknowledge how articulate everyone has been, both on the technical side and the business side. This is, by any definition, the most irresponsible development I have ever seen. And keep in mind, I'm a 45-year retired banker. I used to clean up surplus sites. And also keep in mind, a good example of what this will evolve into is Sterigenics in Willowbrook, Illinois. So anybody who's listening, Google Sterigenics in Willowbrook, Illinois, and look at the cancer-causing rate that was never determined when they first moved into Willowbrook, Illinois. It's, I think it's a several $100 million lawsuit now. And, everybody's already pointed out all the obvious facts. This is irresponsible, and I am an independent voter. But let me tell you something. This is irresponsible politics. Governor Whitmer and any politician connected to this is responsible for this. If this goes in, everybody should remember who supported this. Governor Whitmer went on in many articles and was published to support this. I am a business person. I support business development. This, by any means, is irresponsible. So I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of EGLE, and I know you guys have to do your job, and I've worked with your department before on stormwater containment in the Diamond Lake area, which is a problem as well. But you got to use some judgment, guys. Okay, I understand you're technical engineers. I get it. Okay, I work with technical engineers to clean up the worst toxic sites you could possibly imagine in this country. Okay, this is in disguise a toxic site. While we're not going to be digging up a lot of stuff here to correct this environmental contamination, the air is worse. So take a look at Sterigenics in Willowbrook, Illinois. Look at how many people have died, and look at the studies that they did that was accepted by the local environmental departments here in Illinois. Okay, you guys need to pay attention to that. You need to pay attention to what everybody has said here. This is their first plant in the U.S. Do you know why it's in Cassopolis? I will tell you why.
You've got
Because
about 30 seconds left, Dale.
They have an affiliate in Elkhart. They got kicked out of Elkhart. That's why they're going to Cassopolis. So no offense to EGLE. Please reject this ridiculous, irresponsible proposal.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, the next hand I have up is John Drumbowski. John, you are unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment. John, I see you're unmuted on our end. You may have to click the little microphone icon on your end to unmute yourself.
Hello, this is John Dabrowski. I'm the Howell Point Association president. I really don't have much to add today. I was kind of surprised somehow. I'm listening in on the hearing. I really don't have anything to add. I'm very much in line with the comments made by the prior speakers. And as Dale spoke to, I'm quite aware of the damage that were done in communities for the plant that was put up in Willowbrook. So thank you so much. I'm glad that this has been a good opportunity to share some ideas with your organization.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, the next hand I see up is Melissa McKay. Melissa, you are unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and make your comment when you're ready.
Hello, I'm Melissa McKay, and I am a current resident of Cassopolis. I would like to ask, will you be reading as required by Michigan OMA all emailed public comments? And said emails must be made public record and FOIAble. I would also like to say that a public hearing is not meaningful if the regulated company has already invested millions of dollars, construction is underway, public entities have already committed resources, and residents are only then invited to comment on whether the facility should be allowed to emit hazardous pollutants into their community. This is not meaningful public participation. It creates the appearance of a predetermined outcome. Thank you for listening to my little spiel. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, the next commenter I have is Michelle Shaughnessy. Michelle, you are unmuted. Go ahead and make your comment when you're ready.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Sure can. Sound great.
So I am also a resident of Diamond Lake since 1994. I would start by saying that as a community back in the 90s, we started by protecting this lake by putting in a sewer system, and we were one of the first people to do it. I strongly oppose this permit because of what everybody said about it being less than half a mile from where I live on the lake. And when you look at a threshold that's 1.86 below the standards, I've also been in business and I've also worked through a lot of regulatory stuff. Models are models, and you can cook the books however you want to make it say what you want. I also want to reiterate that what other people have said about we are not in an industrial space, we are in a residential space. And federal standards are all based on the fact that they are in industrial spaces. I have significant concerns about the air monitoring, and I will reiterate what Kelly Ball said, which I believe is very important, is we cannot take this permit in a silo. We have to look at what else is going on in that industrial park and what emissions that has, plus the potential future of a data center that we are also facing here. With all this in mind, I strongly oppose the issuance of this permit. It is a Turkish company, like they said, and the regulations that they are trying to abide with here are different than what they have been abiding with in their own country. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next hand I have up is Lauren. Lauren, you were on my original list, so let's see if we can get you unmuted here to talk. Oh, your hand just went down. So if you didn't mean to have your hand up, or you did, oh, there you are again. So let's get you unmuted, Lauren, and you're unmuted on our end if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and make your comment.
Hi there. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me, Caitlin and Annette?
Sure can. You sound great.
Okay, great. So I second everything that has already been stated by the public. And I think, additional concerns that I have, or questions I have, really have to do with, the question that we have here about the operational models, I think is one of the most valid. And the fact that this entire potential permit hinges on these numbers, I just have to ask, what are the alternatives if, there are, I guess, unprecise modeling measurements can lead to permit invalidation. So, I mean, there can be administrative challenges or even civil lawsuits. So with permit challengers and such, that can prove that there are flawed models at hand. Is this something that would lead to a potential permit reversal? And the other question I have is, in these monitoring, and the testing phases, even as they go through, should they pass all of this, even if you give them a permit now, should emissions shift and change, which they inevitably will down the road, what is there to say that the monitoring won't be maintained? I mean, is there fence line monitoring? What other monitoring would you have built in place should you give this permit? And if there is anything that exceeds that, is there going to be talk about built-in auto shutdowns of full operations rather than just financial, a slap on the wrist, so to speak, with a financial fine? Again, this coming in, the timing could not be worse for our communities to have to deal with this. I'm personally a permanent full-time resident on Donnell Lake and Vandalia, Michigan. And, you're 2.5 miles from me. And this is, it's kind of earth shattering for those of us that live here and have chosen to raise our families here. And we're facing within literally less than 2 square miles, the potential aggravated assaults of heavy industry on our small, rural, mild-mannered mini tourist town, where our lakes and our downtowns and Cassopolis there is just, it's our lifeblood and it's our lifeline. And this is this isn't something that can be taken back or undone from an environmental standpoint, but it also can't be reversed, the damage that it'll do to the community and the businesses within the community. That
got about 30 seconds left, Lauren.
This again, I really hope that due diligence is done and then some to make sure that all models are reviewed extensively and that serious consideration to upgrading policies on Eagle's End is made, given the rash of heavy industry coming into our town. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Good.
Okay, next person I have up here is Laura List. Laura, I did have you already make a comment. Was there somebody else with you that wants to make a comment?
Not specifically. I only wanted to comment to say that we, our primary residence is in Illinois, within about 5 miles or less of that Sterigenics plant. So we intimately know the impact of that, and we would echo those concerns.
Appreciate that, Laura. Yeah, we are taking one comment per person, but we welcome any more comments in our other ways as well. So thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. At this time, I welcome anyone else who would like to make a comment. You can do that by raising your hand. If you have make a comment, if you have not already done so, you can do that by raising your hand in your Zoom toolbar, or if you are one of the folks that's on the phone with us, pressing *9, that will raise your hand on our end, and we can go ahead and get you unmuted. So, okay, I do see a hand up. So Justin Smith, you are unmuted on our end. You should be able to unmute yourself and make your comment. It does look like you're on the phone, so you might have to push *3, I believe. Just checking with Justin here, see if he's able to get himself unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you, Justin.
Yes. I would like to call and just inform everyone on the phone, outside the decision made today or when they make the decision. We still need to take this up with our city council. This was an approved plan, and we need to find the agenda in the minutes on what they approved. And if this business model has changed their plans to now go without this filtration system to make it unsafe, we have the right, or we need to force the board to undo the decision they made on the business plan approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate your comment. Okay. Next hand up I see is Julie Conboy Hesse. So Julie, go ahead. You are unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and make your comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, thanks. So thanks for this evening. Thanks for all the well-articulated comments from everyone. So I am a member of the Cassopolis community, Diamond Lake, and have been there. My family's been there for, many, 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 many decades. And we're all still there, and all of us are still raising our children. I come from this at a different angle right now after listening to all of these articulated comments, well-positioned, strongly oppose anything to do with this plant and any future development that even hints at putting in this type of pollutant. This is, to me, a no-brainer. I mean, that's sort of a full stop. I'm coming at it from all of the people that live in Cassopolis, that live in the farms, live in the rural areas, that weren't even made aware of this. Who's speaking on their behalf? I'm going to do that right now. There are so many people this is going to impact, so many children, so many families. We all know Cassopolis is a very developing community. We know people have been there working tirelessly for decades to make ends meet. Why on earth would we put anything in that community that's going to hurt what's now being turned around in terms of prosperity, hope, opportunity? What's being done to downtown Cassopolis and Stone Lake puts a smile on every person's face, seeing what is now happening with that community, bridging the gaps, seeing economic development. This is not economic development at that smart park right now. This is just irresponsible business. And to the first person who said, I'm all for responsible business development, I'm all for jobs. Again, how many jobs are going to be created? We're talking under 50. Under 50 jobs. And if anyone has lived near or around South Bend, all I have to say is ethanol plant, and we all know what happens. So thank you for taking the time. I do not want this to be the example of, oh, I wish we wouldn't have been asleep at the wheel. We need to take a hard stop. As someone else said, the assault between the data centers, the marijuana plants, and this every 6 months, all these associations are doing is fighting off quality of life issues that are going to hurt the community of Cassopolis. Forget about Diamond Lake.
You've got about 30 seconds left, Julie.
I'm asking for you to consider the residents of Cassopolis that cannot speak for themselves and that are doing the best they can. So please, please do not react to this. Be proactive. Come out on the offense. Do not do defense on this. We will lose. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, the next hand up that I see is Jesse Binns. Jesse, you are unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment.
Okay, can you hear me?
Sure can.
All right, perfect. So my name is Jesse Binns. I'm a lifelong resident of Cassopolis. Just wanted to speak on behalf of, we're putting an industrial park in the center of a county that has one full-time fire department that's about 12 miles away. And all the other departments are volunteer, working on very minimal budgets. I know that was a concern earlier, and it should be a great concern. They don't have the resources to handle a significant incident if it were to happen. So safety should be a number one concern. One other concern that I have is for a business coming into a community to have already been issued a violation, to have started construction without the permit is very concerning. If they're willing to violate something that soon, and I meant basically waste money if the permit was denied, what makes us think that they're going to comply with the requirements that you have in place? Obviously, violations don't concern them. So that's all I have, and thank you guys for your time, and I hope it gets denied.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, the next hand I have up is Roger Defoe. Roger, you are unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and make your comment.
Can you hear me?
I sure can. You sound great.
Good, thank you. I live across the road from where this plant is being constructed. I can hear the construction going on at night in my backyard. And I have a concern, first violation of the permit, but 84 tons of styrene a year going into the air. That's a ton, about a ton every 4 days, about 500 pounds a day. Just imagine 500 pounds of gasoline being evaporated in this plant yard and going into our atmosphere. But there's a chemical safety data sheet. I think it's issued by OSHA, and it has to say this about styrene. Some of the precautions: do not breathe dust, fume, gas, mist, vapors, or spray. Avoid breathing those. It's harmful if inhaled, and suspected of damaging fertility or an unborn child, causes damage to organs through prolonged or repeated exposure. Now, that's going to be us, prolonged and repeated exposure, 365 days a year, and no way to get away from it. I think you should look long and hard at granting this permit without an RTO or some other device in place that will mitigate the styrene fumes as well as the other hazardous fumes. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, the next hand I see up is Jim Peterson. Jim, you are unmuted on our end. You should be able to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hi, this is actually Jean McKay, not Jim Peterson.
Okay, sorry about that.
It sounds quite all right. My name is Jean McKay. I am a resident of Cassopolis, and I'm speaking as one member of the council for the village of Cassopolis. As a trustee, I am not speaking for the entire council, but as myself and as a resident of Cassopolis. Yes. I know EGLE's classified the fiberglass plant as a major source of hazardous air pollutant. And because the council extended a local tax support, we have an even greater moral obligation, I think, to protect our residents. I strongly urge EGLE to require the highest possible level of emissions controls. Economic development means nothing if it compromises the safety of our families. I do believe our council is dedicated to fostering responsible economic development that brings high quality jobs to Cass County. And we welcome investment to our region. Our highest priority should still remain the health, safety, and quality of life for the residents we represent. Because the manufacturing facility is located directly adjacent to our community, I, again, really strongly urge EGLE to enforce highest standards of air quality monitoring and emissions controls. I am going to be asking the council to request another Q&A. We'll see where that goes. That involves the state, the public, and Fibrosan in an actual non-technical setting. So I look forward to seeing if that culminates to something that allows the public to Q&A with Fibrosan as well. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you for your comment, Jean. Okay, next hand I see up is Patrick Byrne. Patrick, you are unmuted on our end. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hello there. I am Roseanne Byrne. I am the wife of Patrick Byrne. I'm sitting here with my husband and we logged on together. I have been a resident of Cassopolis since 2020. We moved from Willowbrook, Illinois during the time that COVID popped up. Stereogenics was less than 2 miles from our home in Willowbrook. It was shut down in 2019. There are a number of people in our community back home that have had cancer. They are fighting cancer. They are part of the class action suit against stereogenics. Do your research, look it up, and think about hard and fast evidence of what emissions does to our atmosphere and to residents, to livestock, to the 3 or 4 bald eagles that actually do take flight and live on Diamond Lake. This is not something, this is such an important decision that many of you are going to have to really think about, because I am a mother, I am a grandmother, I'm a resident of Cassopolis. We are breathing clean air, we are enjoying our environment, and it almost appears as though this came in at the dead of night. We are all hyper-focused on the data center issue, and all of a sudden we have an email concerning this issue that popped up a week and a half ago. Nobody knew about it. There have been a number of residents that have been going to the Penn Township meetings, but all of a sudden this came into clear view. Not even 10 days ago. Where has it been? I went to the meeting at Cassopolis last night. They all seem to be, everybody's pointing the finger back and forth. MEC, Cassopolis. Nobody really seems to know what's going on. And this Fibrosan comes in and starts building and is violating a permit. Could you imagine if I violated my building permit when I built here? I would have had inspectors knocking down my door. I have no idea what's going on, but this has been a cover-up from day one. And I looked up when the building permit was
You've
taken
got about
out.
30 seconds left.
You don't have to interrupt me, I know.
Sorry.
The building permit was taken out in April of 2026. It is now July. We didn't even hear about this. There was not one word spoken by anyone at any of those meetings, not a whisper about what was going on over here at MEC. That actually has the green initiative going on and policies. Are they so desperate for tax dollars here? And everybody is covering it up, and we as the residents that's going to inhale and ingest this, and 5 years from now we're going to have lung cancers and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I'm sorry, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be very responsible for this. So I would really think, as EGLE, that comes and looks at everybody putting things on this lake, they are issuing permits, they are looking at what we're doing, and yet it's right in our backyard. I can walk over there. I can hear what's going on at the aluminum plant. That's not so clean either. So you know what? EGLE has a responsibility to our community, and I would thank you for listening, and I appreciate everybody that's spoken, but take a look at stereogenics. And you know what? There's a conscientious part of everybody here that needs to really look inside. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, hand up I see is Jim Peterson again. Do we have another commenter on the line there?
Hello, this is Jim Peterson. Don't know how my fellow trustee was misidentified as me, but my comment is simply this. There's obviously a lot of broken trust. And it was a revelation tonight. Thank you for doing your job very well and stopping construction of a plant that did not have its permit. That surprised all of us a few weeks ago. And I want to assure you that the council didn't know, and there's a lot of like broken trust as far as what was going on. And included with that, in plain English, the term best available control technology, which the law calls for, is simply irreconcilable with not practical or not economically feasible. Either we have to insist on the best available technology or we get the less than best. And I find it very troubling, very problematic that EGLE has accepted what Fibrosan has said, given all the other areas that they've broken. This project should not go forward without the best technology at whatever cost. And for a facility that is expected to and has already received our tax dollars and tax abatements, not from the village of Cassopolis yet, but the application is in. I don't think they can plead poverty for not being feasible or not being economically feasible to clean up whatever they're doing inside those four walls. I'm proud of what Cassopolis has done as far as creating a better community, a good place to live, work, and raise a family. But this Fibrosan plant, with its emissions, with its processes that we're supposed to measure and keep control, with lack of monitoring and lack of the best technology to resolve the emissions problems, should not go forward. I'm glad the construction should stop. For my sake, I hope it stops for a good long time until they come to the table and do some honest discussion with the community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands at this time, but I do want to just give a moment of pause here in case anybody is considering making a comment. They can again use that raise hand icon, or if you're one of the folks on the phone and you haven't made a comment yet, you can hit that *9 or raise your hand icon. So I'm just going to mute myself and see if anybody still wishes to make a comment? Okay, for the hands that are raised, are there other folks at the residence with you? I think a couple of you have made comments before. We are taking one comment per person. But Julie Conboy Hesse, if there's somebody else, I'll unmute you just in case there's somebody else on the line with you that wishes to make a comment.
Hi, no, I just wanted to know if you could just before we wrap up, could you just
we'll be sharing out additional
the
ways to
action
comment.
steps? Yeah, I just
Yep.
want to make sure that we all know what next steps are and what we can be looking for time-wise,
Yep, absolutely.
action items, and all that good stuff. I
Yep,
just
we'll be
wasn't sure if
sharing
that
out
was
the next steps after the hearing portion. Yep, absolutely.
okay. Cool, thanks.
And then Michelle, Shaughnessy, I see that you have your hand up too if there's somebody else at the residence that would like to make a comment as well.
Yes, I have somebody else that would like to make a comment.
Okay, if they want to state their name and any affiliation they have, they can go ahead and make a comment.
Yes, this is Caitlin Shaughnessy, and I'm the daughter of Michelle Shaughnessy, living on Diamond Lake in Michigan. Just as an overarching last comment, the thing that I would urge to ask you guys as public stewards in a government position is if you are so confident with your models that you guys are using, then ask the question, would you be willing to have your house next to this plant? And I'd like to end on that note.
Great, thank you for your comment. Okay, we're through our hands again, so I'll just wait another moment to see if anybody else wishes to make a comment before we get on to any of the other ways to make a comment and kind of the next steps as we move forward. I see a hand, Patrick Byrne. If there's another person at the residence that would like to make a comment, they can go ahead and state their name and any affiliation and make their comment.
Yes, this is Patrick Byrne. I'm a resident of Cassopolis, Michigan. My comment is, what are the next steps, number one? And where can we find the recording for this conversation and hearing after the conclusion of this? Or what are the next steps? Annette, can you walk us through that?
Yep, we will cover that in just a moment. Once we get done with the official hearing portion of taking comments on the record, we will cover all of that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll just give it another moment here. As a reminder, we will cover all of those things where this recording is going to be located and next steps in just a moment. Okay, I'm not seeing any more requests to make a comment. Annette, are you okay if we close the hearing?
Yes, you can go ahead and close out the hearing, Caitlin. Thank you again to everyone for being here tonight.
Thank you, Annette. Okay, so at this point, thank you for your participation, the time you spent to participate in this meeting tonight. We appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period will close at midnight on August 28. All interested parties, anyone provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be notified of the decision on this proposed permit. The hearing is now closed. Thank you again. Okay, so what are the next steps? We did get some of those questions. So if you did not wish to make a comment tonight or you have additional comments to make, I want to cover The few ways that you can go ahead and still make those comments. So they are listed out here on the screen, but I want to read them aloud to you as well. So again, we put the link into the chat to submit your comment directly into my Enviro portal. You can also send us your comment via mail to EGLE Air Quality Division, Permit Section Manager, P.O. Box 30260, Lansing, Michigan, 48909-77660. You can also send those comments in to our email inbox, which is EGLE, EGLE, AQD, PTI public comments, that's all one word, at michigan.gov. Again, that's EGLE-AQD-PTI public comments at michigan.gov. And the last way you can make a comment is by voicemail. You can call directly in and leave your voicemail at 517-284-0900. As I mentioned previously, all of this information is housed in my Enviro portal, including the several documents to look at the proposed project, fact sheets, etc. And you can also direct access those on our website, michigan.gov/EGLE Air Public Notice. That's probably another easier way that you can get directly to all of that information too, as we wrap up the hearing. So again, as I mentioned on how to find that additional information, that is housed in my Enviro portal, as well as our michigan.gov/EGLE Air Public Notice, where you can find the proposed project summary, our technical fact sheet, the proposed permit terms and conditions, as well as a link to the meeting recording. Again, this meeting was recorded. It will be shared out to everyone who participated in this meeting directly via email in the next couple of days, as well as being posted to our EGLE YouTube channel. So you can find the recording in all of those locations in the next couple of days. So lastly, I want to provide you with all of the contact information for all of our panelists here today. If you've got questions about the permit, how the draft permit conditions were developed, you can go ahead and send an email to Jeff or give him a call. For those of you on the phone here, excuse me, Jeff's email address is, excuse me, one moment. Apologies. Jeff's email address is khaledj, KHALEDJ @michigan.gov. And his phone number is 517-582-5117. Any questions about any of the other things can be directed to our folks here. There was a question about the next steps on this. So once the official public comment period closes, all of the comments will be read and listened to. All comments made tonight and any other form will be weighted equally and will be evaluated and responded to accordingly as appropriate based upon any actions that may be taken. So that is the next steps, and anybody who attended this hearing or is on our interested party list will be notified of the decision as well. So with that, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to spend your evening with us. I know it's a nice summer day, and you probably didn't want to be here, but we do appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to spend it with us to talk about this proposed project. And with that, we are going to close out the meeting tonight. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Take care.